So our next presenter is, as one of the original creators of the Magic Collector Expo and the Magic Collector's Corner, Lance Rich, in my opinion, is the future of magic collecting, without a doubt. A relatively young man with a great love of magic, history, and collecting. His presentations at the last two expos were both highlights of the convention. I know you are in store for another informative and entertaining presentation by Lance. Here he is with Magic in Bloom, from Sea to Stage, Lance Rich.
At the dawn of the 20th century, the little mountain town of Calitri, Italy, was feeling rather broken. This centuries-old city had survived famine, war, and invasion, but the Napoleonic dominion of Italy in the early 1800s had left Calitri isolated, insecure, and poor. Its residents, including the artists for which the city was renowned, were leaving the town in droves, seeking brighter horizons. And that's why a 15-year-old boy boarded the steamship First Bismarck. The ship's manifest lists him as a sculptor. The ship docked in New York on February 9th, 1900, and Gerardo Metallo stepped out into his new world. His life in America would be filled with triumph and tragedy, but it's safe to say that had he not arrived in America, I would not be giving this talk today. You see, it starts with a seed. Magicians, by definition, defy the laws of nature. Our best tricks, our most iconic tricks, play to that concept. A human body cannot fly. A human person cannot be sawed in half and live to tell about it. And we cannot create life at will, but that is what we do. We defy nature in wondrous ways. You know, in our history, there have been many great minds have come up with these all-encompassing lists to try to classify the types of magic effects. You know, Winston Freer says there's 17. Daryl Fitzke counts 19. But in his 1932 book, Neo-Magic, S.H. Sharp broke it down to just 6 basic effects and a whole lot of subcategories, one of which most succinctly sums up the topic of today's talk. Natural science laws defy rapid germination. And these are the stories of magic in bloom. Now, I am not an apparatus guy. You know, over centuries, there have been a lot of blooming bushes built by the likes of Conradi, Owen, Schlosser, and so on. And I know, a lot of you guys are very into the mechanics of those. But that's not me. I'm a story guy. And it's a particular story that led me down this path. See, in 2019, I was in the corner of a basement magic room in Milwaukee, looking at this beautiful collection with David Sandy and Jim Rollins. And there was a box, fairly large, a neatly printed label was attached to it, so there wasn't really a mystery as to what was in it. It was a P&L blooming rosebush. But when we opened that box, that's when the mystery developed. You see, meticulously packed in with the prop was a photograph and an 80-year-old letter. But I'll tell you about that later. But first, I want to begin with this disclaimer. This talk is meant to be kind of an overview of the history of blooming stuff, not a super deep dive. So, let's begin in 2550 BC. In truth, no one knows really how old magical horticulture is. But ancient Egypt is a good place to start because the Bible tells us of Aaron's rod, which budded and brought forth buds during the plagues of Egypt that preceded the Exodus. Fast forward a few centuries, and Simon Magus, the magician of Samaria, is described performing a blooming miracle. A similar miracle is also closely associated with the Brahmin priests, and that leads us to the streets of India, where it really gained traction as a conjurer's trick, as a trick. And we know it best as the mango trick. See, a seed is planted in soil, it's sprinkled with water and covered with a basket or a kind of a makeshift tent. When the covering is removed, the seed has sprouted. That small sprout is then recovered, and after a lot of magical hullabaloo, out emerges a very large mango tree from which the fruit is plucked and passed around. Well, as early as 1600, reports of this trick are published, and as you're seeing, the mango trick is still performed today on the streets of India. Now, as I said, it's being reported around the world. The tales of this effect begin to spread, and during the Qing dynasty, the Chinese writer Pu Songling swaps indigenous fruits, a pear for a mango, and writes a short story called Zhongli, or Growing Pears. European travelers brought reports back to the continent. A Frenchman in 1663, an Englishman in 1800, each brought news of the trick they saw, and they do emphasize it is a trick. So word of this feat of magical botany is what eventually reached the ears of two Englishmen. Isaac Fawkes was the prominent English conjurer. By 1720, Fawkes had set up residence in the old tennis court playhouse and was interested in expanding his repertoire beyond sleight of hand. Enter Christopher Pinchbeck, a prominent Fleet Street clockmaker. Pinchbeck designed mechanical marvels, or automata, that Fawkes showcased on stage alongside his magic. So picture an elaborately painted box from which a small tree emerges. Fawkes tells us how magic can speed up nature, and to the music of Handel, leaves open to reveal a flower, then the fruit. And lucky for us, we have this account from February 15th, 1731, when Algerian ambassadors attended the show, and Fawkes raised up an apple tree which bore ripe apples in less than a minute's time, which several of the company tasted of. Now, according to these reports, after the ambassadors tasted the apple, they refused to touch anything else that belonged to Fawkes. You talk about your forbidden fruit. So Joseph Panetti, the French court magician, presents an effect in 1784 called, and please forgive my French because my high school French class was a long time ago, and it was in Kentucky, so... He presents an effect called Le Bouquet Philosophique, or the magical noosque, in which small branches of an orange tree are placed under glass, and the green leaves begin to change, producing natural flowers and fruit. So that's a sensation until this. Henri de Crème, sort of the masked magician of his time, he writes this expose. However, it is because of this book that we have a decent explanation of the bouquet effect, if not its actual workings. So in all likelihood, this effect did inspire the most famous blooming orange tree, which would come some half a century later. But in the meantime, let's go to the Americas. In 1786, an Italian immigrant named Signor Falcone gave his first North American performance, and he became the most modern magician in America in the 18th century. Falcone toured our young country for at least a decade. He likely appeared on more American stages than any other magical entertainer during that time, often with his own mechanical marvels. Well, on the third night of his first ever appearance in New York, this is July 9th, 1787, Falcone promised to make salad grow 2 inches in 5 minutes. And if this is a variation of the Fawkes apple tree, then this is likely the first example of magical botany in America, or as I've taken to calling it, prestigermination. So, back to Paris. When the Soirée Fantastique opened in July of 1845, seemingly overnight, a preeminent magician appeared, fully formed, so to speak. In actuality, Robert Houdin had been working behind the scenes for years, building equipment for other performers. But when the doors of his great theater opened, on night one, audiences saw what has arguably become the most famous blooming effect ever, the marvelous orange tree. Now, there's a way that we think about this trick that's probably wrong. Movies like The Illusionist depict this tree that grows and butterflies that flutter around as if the audience truly believes that it's actually happening. Really though, by the mid-1800s, audiences were quite accustomed to mechanical automata, And Robert Houdin understands that, and this is where I think his real brilliance lies, because he marries other magical effects with the mechanical marvels. So a handkerchief is borrowed and vanished, and after many steps, which include an orange tree blossoming, the handkerchief is found inside an orange. It's really like an elaborate, object to impossible location effect. The blooming stuff, that's just the vehicle to get there. This, of course, is Paul Daniels, performing in 1987 his version of the effect with a beautiful piece of machinery that was built by John Gahn. Robert Houdin himself wrote that the piece was preceded by several magic effects, which motivated its introduction onto the stage. So I'm saying he understands that. So, Aphrodite, the goddess of love, was born from the sea. As the sea foam around her touches the earth, bushes of white roses appear. Later on down the road, her lover, Adonis, he's out hunting, minding his own business, when Ares, the god of war, he's a super jealous type, you know. So he sends this wild boar to attack Adonis. Aphrodite finds out about it and runs after Adonis to warn him, but she's too late. And in her rush to reach Adonis, she's cut herself on a rose bush, splashing her blood all over the white petals, turning the blossoms red. And from that moment on, roses have forever been associated with passion, romance, love, and magic tricks. So when did a magician first make a rose bloom? Good question. Short answer, I don't know. The long answer, there are lots of magic effects with flowers, and researching, you run into two problems. You either don't have a proper description of the effect, or you only have the advertisements to judge by. And this is where Houdini got into some trouble later on when he's researching for his unmasking book. If you only have the advertisements to judge by, magicians aren't known for being completely honest in their advertising. That said, I want to draw your attention to this. So Philippe is someone that Robert Houdin collaborated with and built apparatus for. And in 1845, this is the same year that Houdin opened his theater in Paris, Philippe advertises in London this: the rose tree of Granada. Now, I do believe that it is a blooming rose bush, but if someone knows anything about the effect, I'd sure love to talk with you later. So Robert Houdin himself had two blooming rose effects. The fabulous rose bush was very similar to the orange tree, but perhaps the most remarkable evolution of this effect debuted November 25th of 1850. And this one really blurs the lines between the mechanical and the magical, because in addition to the roses that bloom atop an elaborate Etruscan vase, it involves a card trick, a canary, both a real one and a clockwork one, and a finale where the vase opens up into three parts and an automata figure dances on a tightrope. And sadly, this prop has not survived. And I want to mention two different versions of the blooming rosebush with plots that were directly inspired by the Indian mango trick. Georges Méliès, the French magician, who took over Robert Houdin's theater, eventually made his mark in film. He essentially pioneered early cinematic special effects using magician's techniques. I know you're familiar with some of his work, but likely not with this film. The Wonderful Rose Tree was made in 1904 and was sold in both black and white, or at a higher price, you could get it in a hand-colored version. And it's amazing, because this film was thought to be lost completely until just a few years ago when a nearly complete black and white version was found in a farmhouse basement in Iowa. It's pretty incredible. And then there's the germain flower growth. So it was invented in 1897, and it's been called the best, the most artistic, and if you followed recent auctions, the most collectible of all of the blooming effects. It took Germain over an hour every night to reset this prop, but on stage, it was worth it. Here's what happens. After a spoken introduction, which alludes actually to the mango trick, he showed an empty flower pot, filled it with soil and seeds, and placed it on a table center stage. He opened a fan and slowly fanned toward the pot. A little flower bud began to peek up over the lip of the pot, and within 77 seconds, to the gentle melody of the piece you're hearing now, the plant grew inch by inch and foot by foot. The buds opened and sprouted these fully grown, real red roses, which were distributed to the ladies in the audience. By all accounts, it really must have been amazing to sit in the audience and watch that. So, the date is September 9th, 1940. The magic community in New York crackled with excitement because Dante was returning to America for his first U.S. show since 1927. The Morosco Theater was the place to be, and his show just floored the magicians, the lay audience, and the New York reviewers. Near the end of the first half, an usher interrupted his show by coming down the aisle with this special delivery for Mr. Dante. He held this potted plant wrapped up in tissue to which a telegram was attached. It read, "Dante, if you're a magician, grow some roses on this." And so he did. And for all those magicians in the audience, this was the first time most had seen the brand new P&L rosebush work. The Petrie and Lewis Manufacturing Company, or P&L, was located in New Haven, Connecticut. As you know, they are well known for their metal apparatus, and one of their most revered and now most collectible pieces is the growth of flowers. Charlie Carrere, the husband of Del O'Dell, ignored the no photos policy at the theater, and aren't we glad he did, because his bootlegged film is the only known footage of the Dante show on stage. It almost didn't even make the Dante show. Todd Petrie took the train in from New Haven and touched up the leaves with green paint at Al Flosso's shop before taking it on over to the Morosco, where Dante had just one rehearsal before putting it in the show. Al Flosso later said, "That wasn't the biggest or flashiest thing he did that night, but the next morning, it was the one that all the newspaper reviews talked about." The P&L rosebush was a sensation. John Petrie filed a U.S. patent on this effect on June 18, 1946. Though not many were manufactured, it became a featured effect in the shows of many a mid-century pro, as you see with these props that have survived and now thrive in David Copperfield's incredible collection. Now, Del O'Dell herself eventually developed her own unique take on the trick with a custom P&L rosebush that could be performed surrounded and on the nightclub floor. I want you to check out this very rare video that Julie Ng found, mislabeled actually, I think, deep in the McElhaney Magicana archives. It does not show the blooming, unfortunately, but you are able to see it and to see the table as she revolves it there. In the P&L book, John Henry Grossman writes this. He says, the P&L blooming rosebush was the brainchild of Jerry Metallo. Richard Mossy told us this.
Jerry Metallo. It was his concept, his idea of the trick.
So I wanted to know, who is Jerry Metallo? Well, remember back at the beginning of this talk, I told you about that 15-year-old boy who boarded a ship, leaving his home in Calitri, Italy. Gerardo Metallo, Jerry. I asked around. George Daly said that Jerry's son was his mentor when he first joined his local ring in Stamford, Connecticut. And then incredibly, Tom Ewing told me he was contacted a number of years ago by someone who was writing a book on all of the immigrants who came from Calitri, that little town in Italy. And that led me to Mario Toglia and Angela Toglia, who have both been a wealth of help. And that, in turn, has led me to Geraldine Cash, who is Jerry Metallo's granddaughter. Now, when he arrived in America, he joined his brother, who had found a home in a large Italian community in Stamford. He was an expert woodcarver and an artist of great skill, doing unusual works like these in oil. In fact, his work can still be seen in many New England churches today. He started his magical career at a very early age with Barnum's Circus. He toured with a company as Matako, the Chinese illusionist, and he ran a black art show for many years. By all accounts, he was a fine magician and an originator of large illusions. And it was a family affair, as you can see. After one trip to Italy, he returned home with a wife, and appropriately, her name is Rosa. He also had a mentalism act with his young daughter, Mary, who tragically died at the age of only 17. His own version of levitation was so good that Frederick Eugene Powell used it at a show held in Powell's honor in 1929. That is the Powell testimonial that Mark and Sue just referenced. Powell said that Jerry was unique and of great skill and has the knack of originality. So Jerry worked backstage as a backstage mechanic on that Powell show, and at some point with Powell, he likely created this, a unique new rose bush. See, Powell, by that time, was retired. He was living on the P&L property in New Haven, and this trick, which is now in David Haversad's collection, is a one-of-a-kind build by P&L using paper spring flowers that are activated by a thread and pulled by an offstage assistant. Well, Metallo tinkers with that concept. And what's pretty amazing is that Geraldine Cash has found these documents in her grandfather's stuff. I just got these photos like 3 days ago, so forgive me for reading my handwritten notes here. This is from when he sold his concept to John Petrie, first in 1934 for a price of $50. And in 1939, Metallo has evolved the idea into something I think that we're a little bit more familiar with. This is the first P&L growth of flowers, or the first P&L blooming rose bush. Here is Jerry Metallo with it. Sadly, Metallo died in 1947 at the age of 63 by his own hand. His son continued in magic for the rest of his life, and the Stamford, Connecticut IBM ring was named the Jerry Metallo ring. But his legacy survives. If you've ever looked through a P&L catalog, you've likely seen his name and not even realized it. It's been right there this entire time. And this brings me back to that basement in Milwaukee and that rose bush that is in the collection of Richard Mossy. Richard Mossy, or Doc, as many knew him, was a respected performer and collector. In 1964, he became the youngest elected president of the IBM. But in 1940, he was only 15, and he received the third blooming rose bush. See, at the annual Houdini Club convention of 1940, this young magician debuted his rosebush presentation, and as this write-up in the Genie says, Mossy, the boy magician, was the hit of the show, and for the first time, many of us saw the beautiful blooming rosebush illusion. This was the Petrie Lewis bush, and it is one of the finest things I have ever seen. Incredibly, we've also discovered letters between Fred Mossy, Doc's father, and John Petrie. Petrie writes of that performance, I received a letter from a friend, stated the boy put the bush over with great success. It was the best and most beautiful effect he had ever seen. But Doc had an idea for an improvement.
First time I used it, I became aware of the fact that it was a one-sided, and I wanted a little depth to the thing, to give it the third dimension. And this was done by virtue of constructing the two extra leaves.
So Petrie added these extra branches, and even said he made it, and even Petrie said that it made quite an improvement in the bush. He did this free of charge, and he ended up making all of the future rose bushes more in this style.
It was a solemn trick. It was serious. This is what I didn't care for in Dawkins, because he did it as a throwaway item, whereas with me, it was far from it. It was a featured piece, and this is the way we treated it, music and all.
So it was a featured trick, and packed away in the case was also this script. And it really is a beautiful artistic presentation. Doc Mossy later would tell us that his father actually wrote that script. So the following year, the Houdini Club of Wisconsin held their convention in Appleton, and for the first time, Beatrice Houdini attended the convention. On October 12, 1941, a 16-year-old Dick Mossy, introduced by Dorney, performed this effect in front of Bess. And in that box, we also found this signed photo of Bess to Richard Mossy and a photo of Dick with her. Just after we became the stewards of Richard Mossy's Rosebush, we had the idea to try to recreate the performance at our local ring meeting. I had the script, the music, the prop, and so we did it. Filmed it, sent the YouTube link over to Dick Mossy and his wife, Pat. And Pat loved it so much, she had never been able to actually see it performed before. And she said that Dick was so moved to hear the words that his father wrote that he had enough tears to float a boat. So Dick and Pat have both since gone on. However, today his legacy will live in the words that he first spoke 82 years ago, because I thought that you might like to see his presentation. But first, I want to say what's past is prologue. This story took root centuries ago, millennia ago. It's found in the sands of Egypt, the streets of India, and a parlor in Paris. It's in the hopes of a 15-year-old artist on a ship bound for a new world, and half a century later, in the dreams of a 15-year-old standing on stage in front of his peers. But this story has no end. As collectors and historians, we have the infinite task to be sure the bloom never falls from the bush, and to inform those yet to be that it all starts with a seed. So for a moment, put yourself in the shoes of the boy magician. Can you imagine standing backstage, knowing that when the curtain opens, you'll be standing in front of Mrs. Harriet Houdini?
And now, ladies and gentlemen,
The MC begins.
for a little something that's about 1,000 years in the making.
Oh, what's my opening line? What's my opening line?
Welcome back to the stage,
The curtain's going up.
Lance Rich.
In my next number, I present for your approval an extraordinary effect. I bring to you in the form of this plant the rich lesson of expectancy and hope. Observe with me, if you will, this bush, empty of fruitage and unadorned with blossoms. But unseen, like the star in the light of day, there lies a cradle, rocked by the winds and soothed by the song of birds. And Mother Nature will watch over this tiny babe, and she will nourish it and bathe it in the dew of heaven, and in appointed time unfold and carry to perfect development her lovely conception. And now it shall become my pleasant task to satisfy you that the mysterious authority of magic can hasten to maturity in an instant that which by normal processes would take months to develop. Nature, as you well know, thrives in quiet surroundings and oftentimes seeks complete seclusion. So in deference to her choice, I will remove myself from any possible physical influence. Now, fix your attention on yonder growth and witness with me, in respectful silence for the moment, the dramatic and enthralling spectacle of transcendent beauty. glowed with alluring charm and tranquil grace. Where but a few moments ago stood an unattractive shrub, there now flourishes a bush laden with the fairest objects ever entrusted to the care of nature, American beauty roses. The name rose has come to be the symbol of fragrant loveliness. No flower brings to the mind more beautiful pictures or more varied sentiments than the rose. It imparts elegance and ardor to the language of poets and becomes the delicately scented underbreath of love. It is the tender touch of comfort to the afflicted and the soft, sympathetic voice to the bereaved. It expresses a vibrant yet melodious note of happy congratulations to living occasions and pays a silent but eloquent tribute to the dead. O cherished flower, glorious queen of thy realm, wondrous is thy culture. Wrought beauty but sublime is thy gracious mission. Messenger of countless throbbing emotions, hast thou become, blending thy perfumed fellowship with the refreshing laughter of health and success, or administering thy velvety caress to the burning pain of discouragement and defeat. Homage we render unto thee, O rose, for thou art enthroned on our hearts, the sweetest and fondest child of dimpled spring. How suitable then that the most exquisite endowment of nature be dedicated and presented to the most adored talent of mankind, Our Ladies. Kindly accept this dainty creation of fragrance as a faithful translation of mine devoted admiration.
Lance Rich. You did a quick change and everything, didn't you? Another home run, Lance. Another home run. Wow. All right, you're booked for Cleveland. Start working. We have another good friend here who wants to tell you about something coming up.